I'm not gonna say anything about like them or anything like that. Like in the very least, like the harm was like real and like really unfortunate and shitty. But my friend though, he kind of had a pretty similar experience with that, like in the court of law, where like his lawyer was. This is another really big point about the prison system. He had a public defender because he was too poor to defend himself. He, I swear to God, was actually innocent, or in the very least, like if he did it because he was like in a really bad situation and he was not doing well. But he was a good person. He was a really good friend of mine, and he was just like he was just a person in like a shitty situation at the very least. And what happened to him was because he was too poor. His defendant just said like just go for like a plea bargain and just like admit that you're guilty. And he was really adamant like I really didn't do it. I was like set up and framed. And I can't say like, did he really tell me the truth? I kind of want to believe him though because he was like a good person, and I want to give like that benefit of the doubt as much as I would give it to anyone else. Like I would give it to you, I'd give it to anyone because like I knew him. He was a good person, and he did not deserve like the things that happened to him. And like there was like there was like a few steps going on with like the officers, or like he was forced to like work to like try to pay off his debts, but then unfortunately like this part happened to him. Um, and it's funny about like thinking about these sort of situations, these harms that happen, is that what happens looking to consequence is that people get out and then they go right back into poverty, and then all of a sudden like we have more harm and more like criminal activity going on. And it's like we could so easily fix these things with just some laws, like straightforward like easy laws, and then we can reduce crime and reduce harm overall for like humanity as a whole, those sorts of things. So like good way to like connect that. You just got to be careful about that because what happen is that like, oh yeah, like, and then it's like this thing, and it can get invalidating where it's like you were just listening to me and all of a sudden you're talking about like this other thing, like what happened to me though, that sort of thing. And so like to bring up like throughout this sort of story of like, and the harm is real bad, and making those connections on like a base human level of like those recognitions of like the evils of harm and shit, just to be able to keep the person there in connection with you so that you're not like alienating them from what they were just telling you about. And that connects like really well with your point, Autumn, that you're making a connection to harm as it is like in the world and the human experience, and no one wants that because it just everyone gets hurt and the crime gets worse, and like we can fix it, like it's really easy and stuff like that. And then many other grandmothers of Alex, here don't have to be robbed and stuff like that if we make these sort of reformations. And one of the things as well, I think I wrote this down. It was just for active listening, I guess. Mind your tone. Oh no, wait, no, that's what it was. Oh, I must have skipped that one. Funny enough. Um, yeah, I skipped two of them. That's hilarious. Okay, two quick ones. Keep an eye on your tone. Make sure that like if you are getting emotional yourself, that you have a moment of reflection to pull back on that a little bit and try to keep in line with something that is much more easygoing and much more calming and de-escalating. It's really really important. And as well, utilize humor. Everyone loves to like laugh, like even if it's like kind of like sad and stuff. Like get real and like make those sort of connections. But if you can like throw in a joke there and like just get like a chuckle or something like that, it will make the connection and like the situation so much more diffused, and everyone can get a lot along with each other a lot more instead of just like I'm being like angry and stuff like that. Like the situation just functions beautifully. But yeah, yeah. Um, I suppose we can kind of just like go on from here. But does anyone else have any other points that they want to like bring up? Perspectives. Okay. All right, let's get into the topic here. So, is there really such a thing as a moral war? Moral war. Is war always a moral wrong as well? People's thoughts on that one. Think of examples, argument by analogy.
That could be debated till the cows come home.
Does war necessitate the ending of human life?
Interesting, yeah. What is war in the first place?
Yeah.
We can also
Yeah,
talk about
let's
that.
start. Let's start there,
Hmm.
and see how broad we want to be with that definition.
Yeah. Um, anyone's thoughts about like what let's put it like this. What parts of war, in order to be war, do you think are necessary? Thoughts on that one?
Threats.
Threats. I like it. It's a good idea. Yeah, it's a good idea. Um, violence.
I think violence is necessary for it to be war.
Yeah.
I think that a philosophical definition of violence is different than a like a colloquial one, as in it's any harm kind of done by a person to another person or done to a person kind of, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
So
Like,
any
would you
harm.
count the war on drugs as like a war in this definition?
I would say the war on drugs,
It's more of like a buzzword, right?
yeah,
feel like it's being
I would
used
say
as
it
like
was a buzzword, tough on crime,
yeah,
Reagan family.
yeah, it's okay.
Beyond my feelings about them, it was a marketing campaign to where the tough on crime was big, creating a crime and incarcerating people for it.
Yeah,
I
there's a
think
lot of
that,
racism too.
yeah.
Yeah, like,
especially.
I mean, I think there's an idea of it being like a war waged, like by the American government against its citizens, like, in a sense.
Yeah. It's something like almost sort of like a civil war, but just like one side doesn't have a structural foundation to like support it and represent it and stuff like that, so it's even more one-sided. And of course, you see that, right, because then people get locked up and shit,
So-
it's like, yeah, it is one-sided.
So like, does
But-
war have to have two sides to be considered a war, like?
Yeah, or like two sort of like governmental, like, organizational, like structural
Two like
sides.
equal
to it.
parts.
Yeah, could like war be like one-on-one, like one individual to another individual? Does that make sense? Is that a war? Could you have a war with different life? So it has to be like multiple people.
I would say that when we're talking about a control structure, or basically a government, I would say probably a war is some conflict between two structures of some kind of social or political group. And in that case, you can have two people, like in that case, chess is war, because you have a conflict with pieces that you control against someone else. And I'd say that's not helpful for a definition, so, but it's one person, and with pawns representing people, instead of people being pawns. Yeah, so, but probably generally in the real world, in the context of war, yeah, you need more than one people, and you need to have some kind of ability to be able to tell people what they do, what to do, and they do it.
I think wars are between countries. I mean, I was once involved in an online war. It was, I don't even, this was way before Facebook or Twitter. This was between like two separate groups of people on a forum. I don't know what was going on. It was between the carrots and the sporks. It was very strange. But you know, I think wars are between countries.
That's what you wanted to define wars, right? Fair enough.
Let's go with that, I think, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Countries or societies, because like maybe
Yeah.
they don't even have to have like such clear like boundaries.
And also definition of a country, and the borders of a country can often be decided after a war, and can be created by the act of conflict that would become war. Take, for example, civil wars that divide a country.
Yeah.
That if you call the American Revolution a civil war, it wasn't a war until independence was somehow recognized, or something like that.
Yeah.
It was a conflict. It was a national conflict. So let's say between governments, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, is there ever a moral war? Could you like have a war that's like moral? What were people's like sentiments about that one? Or is war always a moral wrong? That's
The
what I'm
closest
asking.
thing we've come to that is the Crusades, and frankly, that's a religious war. I don't think that was very moral, but that's just my opinion.
You think that the like closest example to a moral war was the Crusades?
Yes, but even that wasn't very moral.
Yeah, no, it definitely wasn't. I was just like curious, like why that example though? That's interesting. It's an interesting pick.
Because like, religion and morality are really, really closely bound up.
Okay.
So
So
the
in terms of like
closest
who's
thing,
defining what's moral?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they
so
thought
the
they were
closest
doing
thing we
it.
have to a moral war would be a religious war. So thus the Crusades.
Sure.
But you know, I wouldn't consider that very moral. I
Sure.
still wouldn't consider that very
No,
moral.
sure, like you wouldn't personally, but as far as like for society at the time and the people in like control and that sort
Yeah,
of thing, they were defining it for themselves as being like, oh, this is moral.
yeah.
Okay, sure. Like, what do we think though, Casey?
Yeah, the Crusades were interesting. Some of them were very retake Jerusalem, Holy Land, but a lot of the Crusades were retake Jerusalem, Holy Land, take all the goods and money from Muslims that are there that are wealthy. And that was most of them.
Yeah.
And in that regard, they were often successful. I would say, very unpopularly, a war founded on morals, which is not the same thing as a moral war. An example of that might be Vietnam. The idea of stopping the spread of communism, and that violence is necessary to protect the free world. The free world.
Yeah, cringy, right? I was just like disturbing. No, sure. So we can at least have like a war founded on morals. But would we ever say like, could anyone think of like a hypothetical war, something that has actually happened in history where there was a war of sorts and it was actually like moral? So like for example, would we say that like World War II against the Nazis, like for us to be able to like fight against and engage in war, was that moral? Was it moral of us to engage in war and do what we did in World War II?
Maybe so, but we were stopping a genocide. I mean, World War II wasn't all about stopping genocide, but stopping genocide was a part of it. And the only problem with that line of reasoning is that there are so many genocides that happen in the world and we don't go to war to stop them.
Yeah, the UN just doesn't do shit. So.
I think it's interesting to consider it moral in that way, especially versus talking about the United States versus France and England. England didn't get involved, and especially France didn't get involved, both of them, until they had allies that were attacked. And at that point, it becomes because of the nature of the alliance self-defense. And if that's a moral action, separate from the propaganda of stopping the Nazi genocide, whether or not that was the reason for the war happening, or the intention of the people waging in said war. Was it to stop Germany from taking over my country, or was it to free the Jewish people that are being persecuted?
And even then, like, it could just, like, straightforwardly be both, right? I mean, you'd say that it's moral to have, like, self-defense, right? To make sure that, like, your country isn't overtaken by these people who are brutes and violent, right? Like, even if they, like, weren't doing, genocide per se, you can just say that they're, like, being extraordinarily aggressive and you don't trust them and they're trying to force themselves over you and your countrymen, that sort of thing. As far as, like, World War II goes, there's definitely like parts of it that like are sort of like gray areas where it's just sort of like, oh, we're only involved now because like alliances and shit like that, sort of picked up. At least like the combating of genocide seems to be like a pretty clear sort of thing that we can look to and say, yeah, like that's sort of like a moral thing. So by and large, people are on point with saying like, yeah, you can have moral wars. Yeah, it's interesting.
Can both sides be having a moral war at the same time?
Yeah.
Because
I mean, like, it would be like one big clusterfuck of miscommunication, though. You know what I mean? They're both good guys. They're just murdering each other. It's just a misunderstanding, though.
We were talking about, like, Germany and the Nazis being in a class, and talking about how especially the kind of idea of propaganda that Hitler disseminated beyond eugenics and master race.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was
Animal rights.
Well, that, but also a lot of that was popular because there was an idea that there were too many people, that there was too many people and not enough food, especially because of the reparations from World War I. And that fit in the context. He was able to use that context of the German people are starving. And solutions to that are what's going to make them vote for you and do what you want. And one of those solutions is there's a large minority of people that are bad and evil and taking your food. All these people around, Germany was shrunk after World War I, so this land was rightfully ours, and they took it from you. They took it from you. And we are going to go get that back and give it to you and feed your children. And in that way, it can be seen morally as the German government trying to help the people they want to be the German people.
Did great things for Germany. That's what
they're great things for German Aryans.
Yeah, and on top of that, he was also like a really serious like animal rights activist. The dude like loved dogs and shit. So that's like kind of funny. He made like reformations to like their animal abuse code or some shit like that. But yeah, he was really big on that one. But yeah, so it, you know, definitely has a lot of gray areas to war. We would see that like in some cases it does seem that you can be like moral about it. Now the pacifists would like seriously disagree with that. That, you know, like no, if you're gonna be like a literal like or absolute pacifist, like you can't engage in war. Um, which is interesting. So let me try to put it like this: what sort of alternatives? Like so let's put ourselves back as like um, let's put ourselves as being like a country, and there's a country like, you know, Germany, and they're like, you know, kind of great in the ways they are, but they're also like committing genocide and shit, and they're trying to like come over at like at us, and they're trying to just like take us over. What sort of like alternatives besides just engaging in straight up good old fashioned war and bloody and shooting, you know, all that shit? What sort of like alternatives could you imagine for like a country to like try to not do that? Sedition would be like you know, it's sabotage, you know, guerrilla warfare even, but like just against like their supplies and shit. Maybe some stuff like that.
You mentioned earlier threat, which is really big nowadays and has been since the end of World War II, specifically in the context of nuclear armament and mutually assured destruction. And the fact that we have not gone to war is because if we did and we did it seriously, everybody on the planet would die. And that seems kind of bad for everybody, so nobody's done it yet. We've gotten really close. Oh my god! If you want to look up how close we've gotten,
Yeah, I believe it.
but I guess it's the bombs coming back with no holes in their fuselage. Because if they got a hole in their fuselage from a bullet, the plane would explode and it wouldn't come back. So we're in the place where it hasn't happened, and that's why we can talk about it. Whatever. That's the fully outside. But the threat of violence, a strong alliance showing if you have 15 countries in an alliance, hopefully that may deter someone from going off and invading a country that will make everybody upset.
Yeah, no, that's true. You can just say like, if you come at me, I will use this like massive stick. Something that I remember thinking about like a while ago, and it was really disturbing because like how this even passed my mind when I first like, you know, when you're learning about like what happened in World War II and shit like that, and they dropped, you know, the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Um, it something that like really like stuck out to me as being like just this really insane, like how did that not, but how did that not happen? We didn't actually have to drop bombs on those cities and killing millions in like, you know, in a split second. We could have warned like the Japanese government like, hey, like just look out to this direction, and then like, you know, set up something of like a platform out in the ocean and then blew them up there and say like, hey, here are like the effects, like you know what we have now. Um, but instead we just dropped it up on their people.
Yeah, part of it was Nagasaki was a big port, especially military, but also it was a port town, a port city. Hiroshima was just a city, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So it was we are going to kill this millions of your civilians so that you stop killing our soldiers.
Yeah.
And Japan was very, very close to surrendering before the bombs were dropped.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that too.
We can talk forever about what else could have been done, and what should we do next time.
Yeah. I mean, you really do wonder about like the there's no way to not have this being an understatement, but like the extreme and gross incompetence of like leaders, and how the fuck did you like miss that opportunity to just drop it off in the ocean and show them like what we had?
Yeah, it's awful because one thing is people are people, and becoming an adult and being 19 years old and realizing I'm an adult now, I could be working, I could have a job, I could go into politics, and I'm a guy, and everyone else is just a guy, gender neutral guy, and that President Harry Truman, who made the final decision to drop 2 bombs in Japan, was just a guy that had been in the Oval Office fighting a war for years. And whether or not he made the right decision, it was a decision made in context of not the best way to make a rational decision about how to use a new toy.
Yeah, you wanna call it a toy, but
Yeah,
it's definitely used
exactly.
like one, it's kind of a problem. So we were talking about some examples like that though, like, does war necessitate murder, and it's like, not necessarily, so we can utilize threats, like threats is something between countries, and we can engage in, sedition, like putting in like, insurgents in their country, and, engaging in sabotage and stuff like that. So, in that sense, then it does seem that you can like engage in war without the violence and the death. Um, but here we are so many times having done that.
Without the violence or without the death?
Well, the violence, if you
Because-
want to put it like this, like verbal violence, right? Threats are a form of that. So it would just be the deaths. That's the murder part. This is a fun one. What war crimes have been committed by our country, and how do we deal with such realities, if at all?
We have a list of war crimes, and it's more likely a checkbox with every line crossed out. I mean, I don't have that list, but
Yeah, no, you can imagine that. Just like knowing just the American history and shit. Yeah, I would think Vietnam would be like a really good example of that. We knew like since like near the beginning, the government knew since the very beginning of the Vietnam War that we were going to lose, and they kept sending soldiers in for one reason and one reason only, to save face on the world stage. Um, they murdered like millions of people and tens of thousands of our American soldiers, if not hundreds actually. Um, and the average death for a Vietnam soldier was 20. They murdered our children, and they were murdering children, using children. I mean, we talk about like child soldiers and shit like that, in like in Africa or some shit.
Little weapon, little weapon, little weapon.
No, I don't know the song.
Lupe Fiasco. Great song, listen to it.
Yeah, I believe it. But yeah, I mean, it's really insane what sort of things have happened. So, how do we deal with that? Anyone's ideas on that one?
Separate yourself from the state.
Yeah,
You're not the state.
and that's a really important point too. In so many different contexts, when you're engaging in a conversation about like there are things that need to like be changed. We need to do things differently. We need to understand like what has happened, like in white privilege and the system of society. That it's not so much of a you personally, like you are America. Like no, you're a person here, and then there's politicians who are like designing our laws and our structure for our society and have like fucked up horribly and massively. So the disassociation there is really important. The one thing I would want to note though is responsibility nonetheless, that you are a part of the country, that you have a position of power and influence and a stage and a platform that you can use, and the persons in the very least that like you like have a contact with, that you are the platform. So when someone comes to you and is like talking about like, oh, like it wasn't that bad though, you know what I mean, like the X, Y, and Z and shit, you can kind of like enlighten the other individual to say like, no, things were actually pretty wrong, and we should never allow such things like that to happen again. Unfortunately, we just recently did with Donald Trump, someone who came to power through demagoguery, which is using fear tactics against like another group of people, and then getting like power through that. Or just like classic example throughout history of like dictators and totalitarian leaders coming to power just by using like these really sophist and horrible methods and stuff like that. Hence also the logical fallacy, analysis. But yeah, so.
It's interesting that generally a state does not exist for the people, it exists for the state.
Yeah, the state exists to continue its own existence,
yeah,
to perpetuate itself.
And often in a pseudo-democratic government like ours,
Yep.
it is because the citizens have a degree of power, it is in the state's interest to respect the interests of the citizens to a certain extent. And the more power the citizens have over who is running the state and how the state is run, the more incentive the state has and the people running the state have to respect the wishes of the people. And the less power the people have, or the less power the specific people have, the less incentive there is to respect their wishes or their needs or their intentions or their desires.
Yeah, of course. If we have to listen to them, we have to listen, and we don't have to, we won't.
Yeah.
That's basically that's the fronting of government.
If not listening to them will be really bad for us,
Mhm.
then we should listen to them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, don't.
Unfortunately, I mean, I could go on about a spiel. I mean, you guys know I'm the president of the Student Activism Club here on campus. Yeah, I could go on a whole spiel about like how that reality is pseudo-democratic. There's something called a money primary. This is the first primary to even be able to see who is out there and who is trying to run for office in the first place, because that takes money, that's campaigning. And the amount of money that is involved in that, millions of dollars easily for some offices, particularly like in Congress and stuff. But and also like you think about like the time, even if it's not so much about like, oh, like you don't have to have millions of dollars, you just need to have like hundreds of thousands available for you or something like that. It's like, yeah, but guess what? Also time, you have to be working on it constantly. And for all the other people who like don't have that because they have like children they need to take care of and shit like that, that's the American people. They are left out of that conversation. So the people who are left over are like those who are getting like easily bought, and we see that like very blatantly. What's up?
At my high school, a year younger than me, is one of my friends from the sports team I was on is literally the son of my district's congressman. And one time I got a ride home from my district's congressman.
Yeah.
And
how'd that conversation go?
it didn't. He was on the phone the whole time. Barely talked to his son.
Yeah.
And his name is Jack. He looked at me and he's like, "It's always like this. It's always like this."
Yeah.
So by becoming someone politically motivated, you have to be the kind of person that is able to sacrifice your family for that.
Everything,
Everything.
power, and that is disturbing on a serious level.
And the fact that you have to be the kind of person that is willing to do that either means you must be older and not have as many things that
like
you
responsibilities, you have the
Yeah.
freedom in the establishment, you're retired, which means you're also conservative, or you're a sociopath. Yay!
Yeah, and by the fact that so many of the people who are left leaning, especially in like the LGBT community, that would be at the point where they're retired now because of HIV/AIDS and everything else, are no longer alive. And therefore, people who are older now are more likely to be conservative.
Yeah.
Just because of if you were left leaning or some kind of divergent from middle class white conservative, you're more likely to be dead by the time you hit the age of my parents. Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah, fun facts. Also, here's another fun fact actually, in relation to this. So this comes from CBS and the New York Times. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about another one. Besides that one, congresspersons on average spend about half their day. This is like the recommendation they have for if you're going into Congress. You have to spend half your day just phone calling and trying to get donations and stuff like that, which is hilarious because if in any other job at all, you would spend half the time that you're like getting paid for that job, not doing your job, you would be fired. These are our leaders of our country, and like in a country that is first and foremost influential on the world stage. That's like disturbing.
And if we talk about the insider trading that happens, for example, Nancy Pelosi and most other senators will sell stocks before something bad happens that they know about.
Yeah, they should know.
They've done it recently, as in this year. There was a big crash a few months ago, and all the people in Senate sold their shit.
Oh yeah, no, sure. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, it's
and then a bad thing happened, which I don't remember what. Ugh.
Yeah, yeah, they shouldn't own stuff like that, or their spouses and friends and shit like that. There just needs to be a lot more regulation on that.
And the fact that they can vote to raise their own salary, is hilariously dystopian.
Yeah. Would we be willing to dodge a draft if it meant someone else would have to go, and how would that make us feel? How do you guys feel about that? Like someone like you, like, are trying to get out of this death situation, but someone has to take your place.
My dad dodged the draft.
Yeah. How do you do it? Tell us, like, enlighten us.
He had a friend that referred him to a doctor that gave him medication that increased his blood pressure. And because they saw that, he didn't go.
Yeah, smart.
And he is incredibly conflicted about that because he has friends from high school and college, especially from high school. He had a friend, a classmate that was drafted into Vietnam, went, died, and his name is on the memorial in the National Mall.
Yeah.
And we went to go and we found the name a couple summers ago, and that was, and of course I was coming out of 6th grade.
The fun fact, the song from Pink Floyd, "Just Another Brick in the Wall," that is, I'm sorry. Oh shit. No, it's not. Okay, anyways. You're just another brick in the wall. That references that wall of just names from Vietnam.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that is in Washington DC, right?
Yes, it's in the National Mall. Yeah.
You know, my adopted nephew and I were actually having a conversation very, very much along these lines. And the thing about him is that he's in the National Guard. And so he's obviously keeping a very close eye on the situation in Ukraine. And politically, he and I are pretty different. I mean, I'm more left leaning and he's more right leaning. But he's keeping an eye on the situation in Ukraine. And one time, and I'm always going to remember this, he said to me, you know, I would rather that it was me going over to Ukraine to fight than you
Yeah.
or
and
anybody else.
I like that because I believe that if you do not believe a war is just, it is your moral obligation. This is my personal opinion and my personal philosophy, that if you do not believe a conflict is just, it is your moral obligation and right to choose not to do that.
That is called being a conscientious objector.
Yes.
That's what that
And
is called.
to use any means necessary
To
to avoid it.
Yeah.
I am diagnosed clinically with depression, so if I were drafted, I would not have to go. I would not be able to. I don't think I'd be able to. Yeah, I would not be able to.
Yeah, mental illness, I don't really like that
If
stuff.
it came to that, I would cut off a toe.
Oh, have you guys seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge? You
Yeah.
could put that, you could put that in the list of movies, Jacob,
Yeah.
for us to see, because that's a very good, it's one of the few war movies that I like, but it's about a conscientious objector.
Who
Yeah.
is still sent
Goes
to
to
war.
war anyways, yeah, he's a
Doesn't-
medic.
And
Yeah.
doesn't have to count.
Which is funny then, because it's like, so conscious objector, it's not the way to dodge the draft, it's a way to just like be a medic. Which help people, like cool stuff, but you're in a war.
I wonder if that's interesting because allowing these, because being able to save people allows for fewer casualties as a statistic, and often that number of casualties determines how fast a war ends.
I'm 80% sure that Jeffrey Dahmer was a trained medic.
Okay, fun fact.
That's how he knew how to kill people so quickly, because he knew which artery to cut so that his victims would bleed out faster.
Yeah, a lot of I'm not a fan of true crime, but a lot of serial killers, a lot of have been followed.
I've got to run, so I'll see
Okay.
you guys next time.
Thanks for coming by, Justin.
Yep.
See you next time.
Yeah, it's a common thing to have some kind of medical training.
Yeah.
There's a doctor that was found a while ago that had killed dozens of patients on purpose.
Yikes.
Sounds like something you guys ever seen it.
And he was skilled enough to make it look like mistakes or accidents or nothing he could do.
Oh, wow.
And he purposely chose to. And oh man, in the context of being a medical professional in an operating room, that adds a full dimension to taking a life. Oh boy.
Yeah, did you guys ever see that series called Dexter?
I've watched about 5 episodes of Dexter.
I would like to see it, but I haven't yet.
Yeah, that's
Don't watch the whole thing.
Don't watch the whole thing.
It gets bad, is what I've heard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it starts off very good
Yeah,
and critically reviewed, but after like maybe season 6 or something, it's bad.
It's a little boring. That happens to like a lot of series that go on for too long. They just, except for like The Simpsons. I think that's like the one exception. Like each and every single episode is like, this is fucking funny. It's why they're the longest running show of all time. Fun fact. So here's the next question. How do we see class conflict? Referencing like Karl Marx and shit. I don't know. I would like just general like straightforward thoughts about that. There's a song by System of a Down. It's they always send the poor. They always send the poor.
Yeah.
To war and stuff. They always send the poor. Yeah, it's a good song.
Isn't that or is it
The
name of the
Unthinking
song?
Majority?
Or,
What? No, it's definitely System of a Down.
yeah.
The Unthinking Majority? That's what the song is called?
Or is it not Killing in the Name of?
No.
That's
Killing
Rage
the Name
Against
of
the Machine.
is yeah.
Right, oh yeah, that's
Rage
right.
Against the
Okay,
Machine.
right.
Yeah.
But who dies in a war? The people who fight on the ground, and the people who are fighting on the ground are people who did not have the option to become officers, and people who become officers, especially in the current United States military, have to have a college degree, or they have to be promoted from field.
Yeah.
And therefore, you have to have some kind of socioeconomic ability to
Be like higher up. and be
to have a
popular.
better education.
Yeah.
And also, if you're wealthy, you are not going to be choosing to go to war.
You know, that reminds me of a scene from Wonder Woman where all the generals who are fighting, I think, World War I, are all gathered in this room, and Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman is in the room, and she's absolutely horrified, and she's like, "You people should be ashamed of yourselves. Our generals in the Maskira and the Amazons, you know, we fight and die along with our soldiers. We do not just, you know, we do not have, our generals do not gather in little rooms making all the decisions, letting our soldiers fight without us." So I don't know, it makes me think of that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, the people who are making decisions have absolutely like no risk of dying, like they're secured, so. And unfortunately, what that implies is that it's all the more like sociopathic, right? There's no sense of like, but I want to like actually conserve life here, it's just, I'm gonna use people as literal pawns and objectify people, and of course, like, well, what position do you hold? A very high position in society, and that affects like the structure of society when it's a whole bunch of people, and they're distanced from that, and there's like psychology involved where they just objectify people as pawns, and that's a lot of that. So, and it definitely has to do with class conflict and such.
I was reading something a few weeks ago when the Ukraine stuff was really blowing up. Pardon phrasing, but talking about the sanctions that we're imposing, and those sanctions almost only hurt Russian citizens,
Yeah.
people,
Yeah, of
and they
course.
don't hurt the oligarchs and the corporations that
Yeah.
run Russia.
Yeah, it's just-
Because someone said something very inflammatory, which was that it was class loyalty takes precedence to national loyalty.
Of course it does.
Um,
Yeah, and you look at like, well, who are the people like funding all like the fucking politicians for their campaigns? They're national, multinational corporation heads and CEOs and shit like that. They're very wealthy